Welcome to session 3. My name is Richard Hacken. I am the European Studies librarian at Brigham Young University and happy to be in such a gorgeous venue this afternoon. I'm also the guy who changed the slides, but they let me graduate to moderator here. This afternoon we have a third and a fourth session. The third session is on 21st century scholarship, mining the past, and the fourth is on forging the future. I will not give introductions and life histories, but if you turn to pages 19 through 21 in your program, you can read abstracts and biographies of those who are going to appear. You'll also notice that our first speaker, Dr. Valérie Beaudouin, on page 5 is described as being affiliated with the Bibliothèque nationale de France, and by page 19 she has graduated to Télécom Paris Tech. So let's just say she is involved with both, okay? And we'll now hear about that.
So I first would like to thank the organizers from CRL for this kind invitation and for being in such a beautiful place. So my presentation will focus on a collaborative project between the Bibliothèque nationale de France and a research laboratory from Télécom Paris Tech, which is an engineering school located in Paris, where I come from. So the aim of the project is to build knowledge on users and uses of Gallica, the digital library of BNF. In the context of our collaboration, we designed an original methodological framework to analyze in-depth use and users of Gallica. So I will present our partnership. I will present our partnership, the methodological framework, the main results, and some reflections on the issues related to the combination of heterogeneous methods. So many research studies have been carried out on user and uses of libraries and digital libraries, in general in academic places. So the state-of-the-art published by Carol Tenopir or the handbook from Dobreva and her colleagues show that almost all the methods from social sciences have been applied to the libraries, although methods are rarely combined. So some research questions are frequently addressed by those research, but I have no time to describe them, but they were very helpful for us. So what is the BibliLab? So in 2012, the BNF, the French National Library, established a partnership with Télécom Paris Tech, the BibliLab, for renewing its methodologies for research studies. So the question was, what kind of methodologies are needed to build an in-depth knowledge of users and uses of the digital library? So Télécom Paris Tech is an engineering school with a big department of social sciences specialized in digital transformation. So it was natural, and we are close the one to the other, so it was quite natural to work together. So in the context of the BibliLab, 4 projects were conducted within 5 years. We started by a state-of-the-art on how users are explored in the digital era and how BNF deals with its audience. These first steps ended with a series of recommendations that were applied in the following projects. The second project aims at understanding how digitized documents are shared, commented, republished outside of the library. It was also, as Emmanuel Bermès explained this morning, one of the first experiments on web and text mining applied to the web archives of the BNF. But Ariane Bouchard will talk about that later. So I will focus on the third and fourth project on Gallica's users and uses. So BNF, as many traditional libraries, has a diversity of reading rooms located in different places in Paris. So users go to the reading rooms to access physical books, manuscripts, etc., because a small part of the documents are being digitized. In the digital space, the French National Library exists through three user interfaces, as Emmanuel explained. First, with Gallica, which is the digital library with more than 4 million of documents digitized, the library catalog, and then DataBNF, an open data project built to enhance the visibility of Gallica's document on the web. So the question for the library and for us was that the audience of the library is changing, and we need to have a better understanding of these changes. The size of the online audience is 30 times more important than the audience in the reading rooms. The quantity of digitized document is really exploding those last years, and the quality of the user interfaces has improved significantly. So the question is, how is now the profile of online users? What kind of uses what are they doing on Gallica? And are there differences between the online readers and the reading room ones? So for that, we built two projects, and both had scientific and technical committees mixing librarians and research teams, and this is an important thing that I'll come back at the end. So we designed a methodological framework for studying users and uses, combining different methodologies. First, we have a qualitative No, I'm doing it. I'm sorry. So we started by a qualitative survey, a small one at the beginning. Then we had an online survey that was answered by more than 55,000 people, and then video ethnography analysis of a very small number of users to have an in-depth view of their uses. And at the same time, in the other project, we have a global analysis of all the log connections to Gallica. So I will present the main results of each method. For log analysis, we worked on the extraction of the connection to Gallica during 1 month. Normally, there are almost 45,000 visits per day on Gallica, so you can imagine the amount of data we had to process. So the idea was to log, as you can see in this image, it's a very huge, it's big, really big data, but our idea was to identify inside those data important actions that correspond to elements of interest for understanding users. So for example, our questions were, do users visit the homepage or do they go directly to documents? Do they explore the documents promoted by the team, by BNF team? How do they combine search, browsing, and downloading? So we identified into the log files access different actions, and we built a clustering based on Markovian model to classify the sequences of action for users. So I selected just one exemplary clusters. For example, these clusters gathers all the sessions on the web where users arrive on the home page and then go through the mediation. The users mobilize the resources put forward by the editorial team. So these sessions, these sessions are these sessions are clearly different from the others. So homepage at the starting point, and then they visit what the librarians have promoted. In this kind of sessions, users start with by the search engine, and then they spend a lot of time browsing, reading the documents. And those two other clusters represent users that do search, use the search engine, then do a kind of browsing, and then download the documents with different patterns of alternation between browsing and search and download. I have no time to present the result of the qualitative interview, but they were very useful, so I'll go back to that after. We also conducted an online survey, and the main result is that in general, the profile of the people who answer online survey is not representative of the audience. It reveals who is the most interested in showing his use of Gallica. And in this sample, we have 88% of the people who answered that declare that they consult Gallica for personal research. So we built also a typology of users, and you can see that you have here the typical academic research with people who go for their work or their studies on Gallica, and in this other cluster, they come to Gallica to do their personal research and principally genealogical research. And here you have people interested in the news, looking at the new documents put online by BNF. And this is a mixed one. For video ethnography, we used the subjective evidence-based ethnography, a methodology designed by Sadi Lalou. So it's an innovative tools and ways for recording and studying human activity in context. So the protocol is constituted by a step of field recording, followed by a replay interview where the subject comments in great details his or her own activity. So we use it to evaluate how users evaluate the relevance of document and to see how Gallica's use is embedded in a multi-activity context. So for example, in this case, we can see with the video recording that when the person evaluates that a document is interesting, he slows down the way the rhythm of scrolling reveals the relevance of the list of results for the users. So we can have this vision through the video. In this case, we can see that Gallica is embedded in a large course of action because, for example, this user, the action of these users is guided by her notebook where she has her to-do list, and also by the customer question who ask for when did the person die. So the user of Gallica is always interacting between Gallica and other elements of its environment. So to conclude, I will finish on some reflection on the interest of combining heterogeneous methods. The first thing is that with each method, we access different kinds of users. For example, with log analysis, we have a global and a comprehensive view of all uses, but users are totally unqualified. While with qualitative and ethnography, we have users that have an intimacy with BNF and Gallica, so they are very expert users of Gallica. And on the online surveys, it promotes regular users and in particular amateurs who are eager to show their interest in Gallica. So for example, when we compare the time spent on Gallica, there is a huge gap between both. Okay, between both, we have the median of the duration of the visit on the online survey, 30 minutes, while it is close to 12 seconds on the log analysis data. So it shows the difference between the kind of audience we can have. The second point is about the interest of combining with research methods. Our purpose was not to juxtapose methods, but to find ways for articulating them. So the first point is that the qualitative interview have been used for wording the questions in the online survey. It was important to use the categories. It was important to use the categories of users that may not be exactly the same as those from librarians. The qualitative and ethnographic approach also help us for guiding the log analysis. It's because we observe how users do in a qualitative way that we could identify the specific actions that were of interest for the log analysis. And as I don't have more time, I won't talk about that. And the last point that is important to underline is the importance of sharing a common culture in this kind of partnership. A scientific and technical committee we had this scientific and technical committee all along the two projects, and the frequent meetings and interactions improve the collaboration, first by allowing a better understanding of the needs and the question of the library, and second, because we had the time to explain the methodologies that we were using. I had no time to explain them in the right way, I'm sorry, for a better appropriation by librarians. We had also a lot of internal meetings at Telecom Paris because we were involved in both cases in interdisciplinary work. For example, in the data mining project, it was the first collaboration between data scientists and social scientists. And interdisciplinary is more difficult today to do than to say. So the quality of our partnership also relies on the quality of the management of these different projects. Sorry. I had no time to...
Jennifer Dalzin is at the Newberry Library in Chicago. Well, not presently, but she is affiliated with them. And she has been involved in a project of mass digitization of some French pamphlets there that she will now talk to us about.
Thank you for the opportunity to talk about Voices of the Revolution. Voices of the Revolution is a grant project funded by the Council on Library and Information Resources. It has a very serviceable subtitle, Digitizing 30,000 French Pamphlets from the Newberry Library. But for the purpose of today's talk, a better subtitle might be A Story of Resistance, Persistence, and Collaboration. I'm going to start the story in the future when, on January 8th, 2018, we will be awarding our first ever, hopefully not only ever, Digital Humanities Prize for the use of the 11 gigabyte data set that will be created through the Voices project. Now, for those of you who don't think in terms of bytes, that translates to 850,000 pages of text, the OCR files related to those pages, and 38,000, as opposed to 30,000, metadata records and the MARC XML associated with those pamphlets. Though the Digital Humanities Grant is new, it builds upon an existing network of research and education programs at the Newberry. Those include one of the largest library-based fellowships that began in 1944, and 4 major research centers, including the Center for Renaissance Studies, with whom we are partnering on the grant. The DH grant and the Voices project altogether marks a very important shift for the Newberry. I am showing here an example, a very small example, of some of the early digitization work we did from about 2004 to 2015. They are reproductions of collection items, most of them ordered by staff or researchers for illustration in publications, exhibitions, websites, or presentations. Sometimes those digital objects were put into an online collection so that people around the globe could find them without having to travel to Chicago, which, as many of you know, that can be a considerable challenge on some days. But this previous work, though important and still very much in demand, falls short of the potential value of a digital program for 21st century scholarship. Prior to Voices, our digitization program was driven either by those customer orders I mentioned or through cherry-picking the collection for important items and highlights. The result was a collection of digital assets that was scattered, shallow, and not especially useful for research. With Voices, after identifying the collections for inclusion, we digitized everything. And we could do that because they were pamphlets as opposed to everything in our collection. Now we invite researchers into the process, into a collaborative and ongoing process of selecting what is important and what is a highlight. Prior to Voices, our digitization program was a photography program. We reproduced images and we took pictures of words. We were not making possible new kinds of scholarship in a digital research environment, which was one of the key factors of the CLEAR grant, and they asked us to talk about how we would be doing that. With our small but meaningful corpus, we are now able to offer this $1,000 grant opportunity for a digital mapping or text mining, data visualization, or other innovative idea that will reveal trends, support arguments, or tell stories via the data. We spent a long time writing the statement, which basically says everyone is eligible to apply. The application process is relatively simple, and the submissions will be judged on the project's significance and value to humanities scholars or general audiences, or both, planned use of the open data, and the feasibility of the project's success. The Voices project also facilitates new kinds of scholarship through a series of digital pedagogy components that is led by our digital initiatives manager, Jen Wolf, and Leah Markey, the director of our Renaissance Center. Before I talk about that, though, it is important to talk a little bit about the easy aspects of the project, digitization and metadata, and tell you a little bit about the collections. On site, we digitized 864 items for a total of 22,692 pages. All of them were loaded into Internet Archive and processed using their French language OCR. Most of the work, however, was outsourced, and here you see John Powell making one of 10 deliveries to the Internet Archive scanning facility in Fort Wayne, Indiana. As part of a 2013-2014 collaborative grant with the University of Florida, CRL, and many others, and by the way, I heard some great interest over lunch to get that group back together to talk about pamphlets. As part of that planning process, we had done a pilot project with 1,400 pamphlets. So we thought we knew what we were doing. Even so, we really underestimated the time and the complexity of inventorying, packing, and getting out of the building 38,000 pamphlets under the stern glare of our conservation department and our security team. For metadata, we already had item-level MARC records for the collections selected. They had been cataloged through a 2009 CLEAR grant by a team that was trained and supervised by Jessica Grigorski, who started off as an assistant in library school and is now our principal cataloger. So it was going to be easy, right? Mostly right. But we added 4 collections to the project that had not been so thoroughly cataloged or cataloged at all, and I'm really glad that Jessica was our principal cataloger and was willing and able to do this work on the fly, sometimes as I was grabbing them with bubble wrap and trying to pack them in boxes. There is no doubt, though, that with those catalog records, we had a huge advantage. The Age of Revolutions blog asked us specifically about our categories during an interview, and here's a page that you can see some of those topics and subjects. I have never seen such enthusiasm for LCSH before, and that was very gratifying. But in addition to the 4 new collections challenge, our metadata plan went beyond extracting and repurposing MARC data. We also committed to batch processing our existing records in order to insert links to digital images and the OCR, and batch processing a process to create new electronic resource records to load into WorldCat. And that sharing in WorldCat was very important to us, not only for researcher discovery process, but as part of that Florida CRL partnership, which had identified WorldCat rather than a new specially designed portal as a place to share records with other institutions. There were 2 collections proposed in the grant, the FRC collection, French Revolution collection, and a much smaller collection of trial and execution pamphlets about Louis XVI. Due to Jessica's in-house work on those batch processing routines and the efficiency of our Fort Wayne partners, we added the following 4 collections. A collection on French laws on censorship, publishers, prospectuses, and catalogs, collections of odes and letters and other material related to Louis XV, and much to the delight of our faculty partners in the digital pedagogy collaboration, a collection of early French political pamphlets from 1560 to 1653. FRC remains at the heart of the project, however, and it brings us to the resistance component of our story. The massive collection of more than 30,000 pamphlets that represent views from all sides of the revolution was purchased in 1957 to 61 by Michel Bernstein. Bernstein and his wife, Monique Rollin, were members of the French Resistance, and I first learned about them in this wonderful book where Rostenberg and Stern go on to describe Bernstein's bookstore, a dilapidated chateau crammed with political pamphlets and a dog named Zubalu. They also mention his descriptive slips, which were used to inventory and locate material in his store, some of which the Newberry now owns. And here's a little peek inside. And a bit more online digging revealed more about Bernstein's war efforts. 2 years, holed up in an apartment, writing a manual for other forgers. I came across a 1979 letter written by Bernstein to Senshu University where he talks about his collecting in great detail, sums up the entire war simply by saying the Second World War came, and then returns to talk about his collecting, his searching, and his decade-plus annotating Martin and Walter. Which brings us to the second element of the story, persistence, and our second hero, Bernie Wilson. Bernie was our rare book cataloger from 1959 until 1986 when he retired. There are 2 boxes in our archives with his professional papers and some personal artifacts, including a photo that I thought might be him. So I asked the 3 remaining staff members who knew him if they could identify him and learned that Bernie had worked in intelligence work during the war. And I also learned that our serials librarian for some reason had his passports at home and she brought them in so we could identify the photo. One of Bernie's early jobs at the Newberry was to pick up where Bernstein left off. annotating a copy of Martin and Walter with our FRC holdings. And for decades, this was the only way into the FRC. But Bernie wanted to do better for this important collection, so useful for numerous fields of literary and historical study. Memo after memo spanning his entire career, advocating item-level cataloging. And then in 1987, more memos with progress reports as a volunteer doing just that. When he died that year, he had cataloged more than 8,000 pamphlets. 20 years later, Jessica and her team picked up and finished the job. Thank goodness all of our collaborations were not so long in the taking. That CRL Florida collaboration also unearthed a goal to promote the use and understanding of pamphlets, including DH projects, and also through opportunities for student assignments and hands-on projects. And our colleagues in Maryland had already set a high bar in this area, and if you have not seen, they have recently published an update on their work with digital humanities in the classroom. Our own project had a series of student opportunities, and as a grant writer, I feel justified in saying that even after consulting several people in this room who had some brilliant ideas, I had that dread combination in the grant of proposing something that was both too ambitious and a little bit vague. Luckily, Jen Wolfe and her team at the Newberry were able to turn those promises into reality, and working with faculty at DePaul and University of Illinois at Chicago, they created a translation tool in Scalar and using Scripto plugins, and the pamphlets were chosen by the instructors and integrated into their class curriculum. In addition to a basic introduction to the site, and some help screens for students on how to use the tool, the site will be added to a gallery targeting a more general English reading audience who may be interested in the resistance or in primary sources but are unable to read the French. All of the students have hands-on opportunities to use the collection. You can see Jessica in the stacks telling them about the collection and the collection's history, and then students using those pamphlets with their instructor in a classroom at the Newberry. All of the students, or students who are interested in coming, all of the instructors and the Newberry team will be having a joint brown bag session on November 10th. So we're bringing universities together. And future plans involve building on our current crowdsourcing activities and our French paleography website and their audience to begin transcription of annotations on the pamphlets which did not benefit from OCR. I'm going to end this story where I began it in the future, this time January 8th, 2019, when I will be reading the brief report from the winner of that Digital Humanities Prize. But I'm hesitant to call this an end to the story. The voices of the Revolution collections present attitudes about radicals and conservatives. They shed light on debates about citizenship and patriotism, and that feels particularly relevant today as an area for exploration for a new generation of scholars, perhaps like these, who came to visit us to learn more about how we are presenting old pamphlets in new ways at our 2017 Bastille Day program in Chicago. Thank you.
Dr. Vera Faßhauer, right here in Frankfurt at the Goethe University, in the Institute for German Literature, has been involved in editing and analyzing content using tools and platforms of historical manuscript collections, and she will speak to us now.
First of all, thank you very much for having me here as the only non-librarian as far as I can see. And it's really a great pleasure to be here. Is there some kind of noise that shouldn't be there? All right. Okay. In view of constantly increasing capacities of data storage, more and more libraries take the opportunity to digitize their collections and make them accessible online. The digital copies are regularly equipped with metadata, but rarely with deeper indexing or description of the contents. This strategy has proved sufficient where printed books are concerned, and given an appropriate scan quality, the readability and accessibility of their contents can generally be taken for granted. Moreover, the current stage of pattern recognition technology allows for fairly good results in machine-based recognition of both Roman and Gothic types. Digital reproductions of printed books thus become accessible for full-text search and consequently also for distant reading and statistical approaches. Some libraries, as for instance the ULB in Halle, also capture all chapter and paragraph headings in electronic tables of contents and link them to the respective page image. As these headings usually contain all representative names and keywords, they provide an excellent starting point for further book study. Similarly, page numbers and indexes can be linked to the pages they refer to, as is often done by Google Books. Digital facsimiles of historical handwriting, however, are subject to wholly different conditions. The handwritten text recognition technology is just under development and depends on large amounts of manually created text transcription. Yet few people nowadays are able to decipher historical handwriting, since the training of paleographic skills is rare even in universities. For the greater part of the public, facsimiles mean nothing more than photographic reproductions of historical artifacts with a certain surface structure, the patterns of which can no longer be decoded. The problem intensifies when it comes to diaries and notebooks, which were originally intended for only the author's eyes. Especially the handwriting of erudite authors is often negligent and hard to decipher. An unrestricted long-term availability of digital facsimiles is therefore not necessarily identical with unlimited accessibility of their contents. The most profound method of accessing handwritten documents is their full-text edition and explanatory annotation. In the case of large manuscript holdings, however, a complete text transcription does not always appear practicable, and the indexing by a larger number of content-related keywords may seem much more reasonable. In order to enable their users to take advantage of their digital collections, the holding libraries can call on the assistance of scholarly experts, familiar not only with historical paleography, but also with the subject matter that manuscripts deal with. Scholars, on the other hand, depend on the library's technical support in order to facilitate and supplement their editorial work. I would like to show some possible instances of an efficient cooperation by the example of the selected edition of the Senckenberg journals, which is currently created at the Department of German Studies at Frankfurt University and funded by the local Senckenberg Foundation. Johann Christian Senckenberg, an 18th century Frankfurt physician and philanthropist, has left handwritten notes on an exceedingly large scale. As a religious dissenter, he refused church attendance as well as the sacraments and pastoral care. Instead, his libraries served him as a means of spiritual self-examination and self-perfection, as well as of critical reflections on the physical and moral state of others. On a professional level, he was strongly influenced by empiricist ideas, which is why he strove to investigate human nature by means of immediate self-experience. Consequently, his journals can be classified in three subcategories, namely first, self-observation, second, medical case studies of his patients, and third, moral and political reflections of his fellow citizens. The notes cover a period of 43 years altogether and extend to 40,000 pages in 53 quarto volumes, each of which contains 700 pages on average. At times, Senckenberg would write up to 5,000 words per day. In 1733 alone, he filled 2,600 pages with approximately 2 million words. His journals represent a unique and extremely rich source for various humanities disciplines, especially the history of church, medicine, science, economy, and ideas, but also linguistic, cultural, and urban history, as well as literary studies and library science. The Frankfurt University Library, as the holder of the journals, has already digitized the entire material in high resolution. All volumes are available online and accompanied by metadata. The headwords, however, refer only to author, work, place, and year, but not to the journal's nature and contents. Formerly envisaged editing projects were abandoned due to the enormous and easily underrated amount of material. Similarly, earlier research was impeded by the vast extent of the journals, as well as Senckenberg's difficult handwriting. The ongoing research project is the first genuine endeavor to explore his huge text source and make it available to the scholarly community as well as to the general public. The Born Digital TI-XML-based edition will be published online under open access conditions. As a complete edition would hardly be feasible, only selected volumes are being edited in full text. The edition consists of 6 volumes in total, representing the range of the collection in a content-related and in a biographical respect. This choice comprises 2 items from each subgroup, namely the self-referential, the medical, and the moral observations, and it also characterizes 3 different decades of Senckenberg's life. Senckenberg's writing routine aimed at taking down a large number of notes in a short time, which only he himself would have to be able to decipher. He kept alternating between German and Latin, and he abbreviated his words in various ways. These abbreviations often cut off the grammatical features at the word endings, on which the comprehensibility of his bilingual and complex sentences depends. It is therefore not enough to transcribe the text in a diplomatic manner, but also necessary to complete the shortened words and adjust the supplementations to the present grammatical conditions. The same applies to the alchemical and astrological symbols, which are ambiguous both grammatically and semantically. They may either replace a whole word or only a part of it and represent up to 5 different meanings, along with all possible grammatical forms, as well as all their Latin equivalents. Our digital editing work does not only render the text legible for human eyes, but also constitute its machine readability. The manually transcribed text selection can therefore serve as a basis for computerized pattern recognition, the outcome of which can subsequently be applied to all remaining volumes, then becoming accessible at least to a limited extent. Consisting of large amounts of writing by a single hand, the Senckenberg journals are an ideal candidate for handwritten text recognition. In the course of the EU project READ, the Research Center for Pattern Recognition and Human Language Technology at the University of Valencia has developed the HDR tool Transcribus. Though still under development, it has already been released as an open source software. In order to recognize handwriting automatically, the tool must be trained on the basis of manually generated and precise text transcriptions. In this process, the digital facsimiles must be segmented into text regions, and the text of the text lines have to be defined by baselines. Although Transcribus supplies a tool for automatic segmentation, the process could only be performed semi-automatically on Senckenberg's densely covered journal pages. Most of the automatically drawn baselines had to be corrected manually or supplied completely. Next, the transcription of each text line is added and linked to its equivalent in the image. In this instance, transcription has to follow the rule, transcribe only what you see, meaning that all characters must be represented as they appear in the original. Thus, extensions of word endings were removed by find and replace commands, and paraphrases of symbols were replaced by Unicode characters as far as possible. My test corpus consisted of 41 pages out of the first subgroup, on which about 16,000 words could be used for training. The training process resulted in an error rate of about 30%, which means that 3 out of 10 characters were not recognized correctly. The fact that Senckenberg's handwriting changed over the years necessitates separate training processes for all subgroups and the generation of 3 different HDR models. According to expert predictions, a continued training with 4 times the amount of transcription data would bring the error rate down to 5% or less. Still, one would have to expect at least 140 character in every third word on average. Nevertheless, the HDR output would then allow for fairly good results in truncated full-text search. Moreover, our volumes can be indexed by means of keyword spotting. Holding libraries can support the scholarly processing of their documents in various respects. Not only are they equipped with the technical facilities for manuscript digitization, but they also manage the authority data of the Integrated Authority File, or GND. The Senckenberg edition refers its readers to the GND for all names of persons and places, as far as they are already included. As we are studying hitherto unedited private documents, however, we are bound to come across lesser-known persons whose historical significance is just being established. In our case, this applies to about 25% of the persons Senckenberg mentions. In other instances, already existing entries contain no more detailed information than the person's name. Scholars can therefore assist the libraries by supplying their basic research data on historical persons, while the libraries may support the digital editors by setting up new GND entries or completing existing ones. In the course of the Senckenberg project, about 160 entries have so far been edited and corrected with the assistance of the Frankfurt University Library. In other instances, scholars can help disambiguate and standardize GND entries, as especially older authors have often been listed several times under different numbers. The Senckenberg edition also provides links to digital copies of printed books, which the author discusses or refers to. At present, about 80% of these titles have already been digitized and published online, which enables us to provide our readers with direct access to the secondary sources. As a religious dissenter, however, Senckenberg was not only interested in widely read literature, but also in heterodox and esoteric publications, of which only very few copies were printed. In my example, Senckenberg lists a number of books purchased at a pietist publishers. In searching for these 11 titles, I have only had 5 hits on the whole internet, 4 of which I found via the bibliography of German printed books of the 17th and 18th century, which referred me to 4 different German universities libraries. One of these titles has been digitized by Google Books, however, in a much poorer quality. Most of the remaining titles were not even recorded in the bibliography of German printed books and could only be traced by their mentions on other historical books. As for the title in number 7, Senckenberg's reference to it is presently the only traceable witness of its existence on the whole internet. In addition, most of them are no longer contained in the Senckenberg collection, as his library was reduced to the strictly medical contents after his death. Apart from showing the relevance of the edition for historical book and library studies, this example points out another possible field of cooperation. Libraries can support scholarly work by making rare books from their historical holdings accessible online, while scholars can help index and contextualize these titles and perhaps even reconstruct historical libraries in a digital environment. No, skip that one. Finally, thanks to their technical staff and capacities, libraries are able to provide infrastructures for digital editions. Research libraries, like for instance, the Herzog August Bibliothek of Wolfenbüttel, carry out in-house editing projects devoted to manuscript collections from their specialist fields. but also some smaller libraries, like the Thuringian University and State Library of Jena, offer long-term storage facilities and publication platforms. Being responsible for the digitization and the online presentation of the state's cultural heritage, the TOL presents its own collections as well as those of the Thuringian State Archives and Museums in the Universal Multimedia Electronic Library, which also supports high-standard scholarly editing. Ideally and most fruitfully, such joint projects would be realized in a permanent cooperation under one and the same roof. In reality, however, scholars are usually employed in academic institutions on the basis of fixed-term contracts. At the same time, the market for digital scholarly editing grows constantly, and the standards rise to the same extent as publishing options and software improve. Scholars must therefore continuously keep up with recent developments and never fall behind the top editing standards. For libraries, the assistance of scholarly experts can ensure high-quality processing of their manuscript collections. In return, the libraries should ensure their technical support on an equally high level. Thank you very much.
I believe we have time for one or two questions. For anyone or everyone.
Thank you all so much for your presentations. The work is wonderful. Congratulations. For the last speaker, I wondered if you could elaborate a little bit on, you mentioned that scholars can interact in some way with the materials in terms of correcting and participating, and I wondered if you could say a word about what is the environment in which they do that? Where does that occur?
Oh, we're going to the people and, sorry. So, it's the usual way of contacting librarians and scholars. There's no platform or something like that.
Okay.
I have a question for Jennifer. So you talked about the shift in your strategy for digitization and that this was a clear grant. Do you see this continuing, that you'll do new projects and will those be grant funded, or do you have other sources to continue in this direction?
Without funding, we will not be able to continue at this level, but we have already been able to shift our model. Some of it has occurred naturally. At the Newberry, we now allow people to have cameras in our reading rooms, and that has dramatically cut back on the amount of customer orders we need to fulfill, so that's certainly freed up some time for that. And with that time, we've been devoting more to programmatic digitization. Unfortunately, at the same time, our exhibition program has kind of shifted the other way, and it's a lot easier and quicker to do things for researchers than people in your own building. So it kind of goes back and forth, but we have certainly had the commitment and talked with administration about the need and the value for going ahead and more thoroughly doing complete volumes, complete collections, manuscript collections. And so it's definitely happening, probably not at the pace of something like this that's grant funded. We are now currently working on a large collection of postcards, which is similar but different. It certainly does not have the text aspect that I'm really hoping that we can shift, or at least part of our effort, away from pretty pictures to actual research collections. Mm-hmm. So yes and no is my answer to that.
Okay. Thank you.
My question is for Dr. Beaudouin. I wondered if you could, who chose the methodologies, particularly the ethnographic method, and was that carried out by librarians, or was that completely a collaboration?
Thank you for your question. The decisions of the kind of methodologies where we at Telecom Paris-Tech, it's our job to do research and to develop some methodologies for. So we propose the kind of methodologies, and we agree with the library to choose one or the other and to combine them in this way.
I think our time is spent, and I think it is well spent. We will have 15 minutes now, break between the third and the fourth session. And thank you very much for your contribution.